Never underestimate a quiet man, because quiet men remember everything. And this particular quiet man, he didn't just remember. He let the truth do the talking. And the truth, when it finally showed up, hit like a freight train. Here's something nobody talks about enough. There are two kinds of powerful people in this world. The first kind got to the top and looked back down at everyone still climbing, and reached out a hand. The second kind got to the top, looked down, and decided the view was better when everyone else stayed small. This story is about the second kind. A CEO who walked into a room full of his own employees, spotted one man, and decided, in about 3 seconds flat, that this man was a loser. Didn't ask a single question, didn't know a single fact, just looked, judged, and opened his mouth. What came out of that mouth changed everything. For everyone in that room, and especially for him. Stay right here, because by the end of this, you're going to feel something, and you're going to think twice about every assumption you've ever made about a stranger. His name was Thomas Grant, and if you looked up the word self-made in a business magazine from 2018, you'd probably find his picture. Thomas built a mid-sized manufacturing company called Prime Tech Industries from basically nothing, started in a rented unit on an industrial strip in Columbus, Ohio. 2 employees, 1 client, and a second-hand machine that broke down every other Tuesday. Fast forward 15 years, and Prime Tech had 3 facilities, over 500 employees, and contracts with some of the biggest construction supply companies in the country. Thomas had been on local news, regional business panels, the whole thing. He drove a blacked-out Escalade and wore clothes that didn't have price tags because the people who sold them to him knew better than to make him look at numbers he didn't need to look at. He was, by every measurable standard, successful. But success, when it's not kept in check, starts doing something weird to a person. It starts making them feel like they earned the right to be rude. Like all those years of hard work also bought them a free pass to treat people however they want. Like their opinion of you matters more than your opinion of yourself. Thomas Grant had been successful for long enough that he'd started confusing confidence with cruelty, and he didn't even notice it happening. That's the scary part. It never feels like cruelty from the inside. It feels like honesty. It feels like standards. It feels like just telling it like it is. What it actually is a man who forgot where he came from. Now let's talk about James Whitfield. James was 38 years old. He worked the floor at Prime Tech's main Columbus facility as a machine operator and quality checker. He'd been there for 4 years. He was the guy who came in 7 minutes early every single shift. He was the guy who noticed when a batch run was slightly off before it became a real problem. He was the guy newer employees went to when they were confused about something because James explained things clearly, without making anyone feel stupid for asking. He wore the same kind of thing every day: dark work pants, a gray thermal underlayer, and a dark green zip-up work jacket that had his name on a small patch near the left chest pocket. The patch was slightly faded because the jacket was a few years old. He didn't replace it because he didn't need to. It did the job. That's all James ever asked of anything. Does it do the job? Outside of Prime Tech, James was a father. A single father to a 10-year-old boy named Carter. Carter's mom, Lisa, had passed away from a sudden illness when Carter was 6. For days in the hospital, then gone. James never fully explained to people what those 4 days were like, because he decided that some things are too precious and too painful to share with the world. So he just carried it, quietly, the way strong people carry the heaviest things, without making a show of the weight. He structured his whole life around Carter. His shift at Prime Tech started early so he could finish in time to pick Carter up from school himself. He packed Carter's lunch every morning. Always included a handwritten note, just a sentence or two, something funny or encouraging, because he'd read somewhere that kids remember those things long after they've forgotten everything else. He coached Carter's weekend soccer team, not because he was a great soccer coach, which he absolutely was not, but because Carter wanted him there and James Whitfield showed up for his kid every single time. This was the man Thomas Grant decided to make an example of. The company did quarterly town halls, all-hands meetings where Thomas would get up, go over numbers, talk strategy, try to fire people up. He was good at it, usually. He had a presence. When Thomas Grant walked into a room, you felt it. This particular town hall was in November. 500 employees packed into the main facility floor, machines pushed to the sides, Rows of folding chairs, a temporary stage set up at the front. Thomas was at the mic. He was in his element. Dark suit, open collar. Moving around the stage the way people do when they've spoken publicly enough times that it feels like their living room. He was about 20 minutes into his talk. Something about efficiency, about raising the bar, about not getting comfortable, when his eyes moved across the crowd and landed on James. James was sitting in the third row. He had his arms crossed loosely, not defensively, just because that's how he sat. He was paying attention. He had a small worn notepad on his knee because James actually took notes at these things. Had done it since his first town hall at Primetech. Because he took his job seriously. But that's not what Thomas saw. Thomas saw the faded jacket, the worn notepad, the crossed arms, and he made a decision. He pointed. You. Third row. What's your name? The room shifted. 500 people turned. James looked up. Calm. James Whitfield. Machine ops and quality, sir. Thomas nodded slowly, looking him up and down from the stage. James. How long you been here? For years. For years. Thomas repeated it like it meant something. Like it was a problem. He looked around at the crowd. Then back at James. You know what I've learned in 15 years of running this company? You can always tell who's going somewhere and who isn't. You know how. He paused for effect. The way they show up. The energy they bring into a room. Whether they look like they want something more. Or whether they've already decided this is good enough. He looked directly at James. No offense, James. But you're giving me good enough right now. That jacket, that posture, that look, it's comfortable. And comfortable is dangerous. Comfortable is where ambition goes to die. 500 people were completely silent. Someone coughed. James did not move. He did not look away. He held Thomas Grant's gaze with the steadiest eyes in that entire building and said nothing. Because James Whitfield had learned a long time ago, in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, holding his 6-year-old son's hand, that not every moment requires a response. Some moments you just survive. And then you keep going. Thomas moved on. Finished his talk. Got applause, the kind of applause that's more reflex than genuine. People shuffled out quietly. The whispers started before James even made it to the exit. Co-workers squeezing his arm. His shift supervisor, a good man named Dale, who looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. People saying I'm sorry, and that was wrong, and he had no right. James thanked each of them, said he was fine, and he meant it mostly. He was used to being underestimated. He'd been underestimated his whole life by people who looked at the surface and stopped there. What Thomas Grant didn't understand, what he couldn't have understood, because he never bothered to look, was that James Whitfield was one of the most quietly exceptional people in that entire company. Here's what the file said. The file that HR Director Maureen Jacobs pulled 2 days after the town hall because she had watched what happened in it, had not left her alone for a single hour since. James Whitfield had flagged and prevented 3 separate production errors in his 4 years at Primetech. Not little errors. Errors that, left uncaught, would have resulted in defective product reaching clients. The internal estimates on what those catches were worth in avoided recalls, in client relationship preservation, in straight money, came to somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 combined. He had also, completely on his own time, written up a revised checklist for the quality inspection process, a tighter, clearer system than the one the company had been using, and submitted it to his direct supervisor 14 months ago. The supervisor had passed it up. It had gotten stuck somewhere in middle management. Nobody had acted on it, but it was sitting right there in the system, time-stamped, with James's name on it, and his attendance record. For years, not one unexcused absence. The only time he'd ever called out was twice, both times for Carter. A fever and a school emergency. He'd noted the reason both times in the system because James was the kind of person who explained himself even when he didn't have to. Maureen closed the file, sat back in her chair, and then she did something that took courage. Because Thomas Grant was not an easy person to push back on. She walked into his office and put the file on his desk. She didn't make a speech. She just said, before you say his name in a room again, you should probably know whose name it is. And she walked out. Thomas read the file alone. His office, late afternoon. The kind of Ohio November light that comes in gray and flat through big windows. He read it once. Then he read the quality checklist James had submitted 14 months ago. the one nobody had acted on, and he recognized immediately, with the trained eye of someone who actually understood operations, that it was better than what they were currently using. He sat with that for a long time. There is a specific kind of shame that comes from realizing you were wrong about someone, not just a little wrong, completely, embarrassingly, publicly wrong, about a man who had been quietly making your company better while you were busy performing confidence in front of a microphone. That shame is heavy. It should be. It's the weight of a lesson that actually matters. Thomas called James into his office the next morning. James came in the same jacket, same calm face. He sat down and waited. Thomas looked at him from across the desk and said, "I owe you an apology. What I said at the town hall was wrong. I made a judgment about you in about 5 seconds and I said it out loud in front of everyone you work with. That was arrogant and it was unfair and I'm sorry." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate that." Thomas pushed the quality checklist across the desk. "This is yours. From 14 months ago. Why didn't you follow up on it?" James looked at the document. "I submitted it to my supervisor. I figured it would move or it wouldn't. I wasn't going to chase it." "Why not?" James looked at him with those steady eyes. "Because I didn't do it to get noticed. Mr. Grant, I did it because it was better. Whether anyone used it wasn't really up to me." Thomas stared at him. "We're implementing it," Thomas said, "starting next month, with full credit to you in the rollout documentation." James nodded once. "Okay. And the quality catches. All 3 of them. I want those recognized properly, retroactively." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Thomas said. And for the first time in that conversation, he didn't sound like a CEO. He sounded like someone who was genuinely, quietly ashamed of himself. It really is. 6 weeks later, Prime Tech held a small internal recognition event. James Whitfield was acknowledged in front of the same 500 people who had watched him get humiliated at that November town hall. Thomas Grant stood at that same mic and said James's name and read out what he had contributed and what it had been worth. And he said clearly, without softening it, "I made a mistake about this man in front of all of you. And I want all of you to see me corrected in front of all of you." The applause that time was not reflex. It was real. James stood up and nodded. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to. He just nodded and sat back down. And when Carter asked him later that night what the event was about, James thought for a second and said, "Someone finally read the full story instead of just the cover." Carter said that sounded like something from a book. James laughed. "Yeah, maybe." He made Carter dinner, helped him with his homework, wrote the next morning's lunch note before he went to bed, something about how Carter was his favorite part of every single day, which was true and had always been true and would always be true no matter what. And here's the thing that stays with me about this whole story. James Whitfield never changed. Not when he was humiliated. Not when he was recognized. He was the same man on both days. The same jacket. The same steady eyes. The same quiet commitment to doing good work and being present for his son. He didn't need Thomas Grant's approval to know his own worth. He already knew. He'd known for years. The world didn't reveal James Whitfield. The world just finally caught up to what he already was. And Thomas Grant, whatever else you want to say about him, he did something that plenty of powerful people never managed to do. He looked at his own reflection and didn't look away from what he saw. That doesn't erase what he did, but it means something. It has to mean something. Because here's the truth that this whole story comes back to. We are all making snap judgments every single day. About the person in the old car. About the quiet coworker in the faded jacket. About the parent at pickup who looks tired and worn down. We see the surface and we write the whole story ourselves without asking a single question. And almost every single time, we are missing something. We are missing the grief they carried that didn't break them. The work they did that nobody logged. The love they showed up with every single day for someone who needed them more than any job ever could. James Whitfield was never just a machine operator in a faded jacket. He was the man who kept his son's world from falling apart, who caught the problems before they became disasters, who wrote the better system even when no one was watching, who sat in a room full of 500 people and got called comfortable, and looked the man who said it straight in the eye without blinking. That is not a man going nowhere. That is a man who already knows exactly where he is, and chose to be there on purpose.